I never believed in ghosts or demons or anything supernatural. I was the kind of person who scoffed at horror movies, rolled my eyes at ghost stories, and told myself that people only saw what they wanted to see. That was before my daughter met Mr. Long. It started with the whispers. I wasn't sure at first. In the quiet of the house, you could hear little noises, floorboards creaking, the wind scratching against the windows, a tap from a distant faucet. But these whispers were different. They came from Emily's room. At first, I thought it was her talking in her sleep. But the sound wasn't her voice. It was softer, more distant, and far too deliberate. I knocked on her door one night, worried she'd had another bad dream. "Emily?" The whispering stopped abruptly. I waited a moment before slowly pushing the door open. Emily was sitting in the dark, cross-legged in the middle of her bed. Her eyes were wide and staring at the closet. She didn't move, didn't seem to notice me. "Sweetheart," I called out, stepping into the room. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting mine. Her smile was strange, too wide, too vacant. "I'm talking to Mr. Long." "Who is Mr. Long?" But she just looked at me as if I should already know. "He's my friend." I chalked it up to another one of her imaginary friends. Kids have them all the time, right? I told myself to let it go. But there was something in her eyes, something hollow, that unsettled me. I kissed her goodnight, leaving the door cracked, but as I stepped out into the hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The days that followed were strange. At first, it was subtle. Little things. Emily being quieter than usual, a faint tremble in her voice when she spoke of Mr. Long. Then came the scratches. I noticed the first one on her arm one evening, while she was eating dinner. It was thin, a red line across her skin that looked like it had been made by something sharp. I asked her about it, but she just shrugged. "It doesn't hurt," she said, her voice distant, like she wasn't really paying attention. I didn't think much of it, but the scratches didn't stop. The next day, she had another, longer one on her shoulder. It looked deep, angry. I asked her if she'd scratched herself in her sleep, but she just stared at the mark, her face blank. "Mr. Long said it's okay," she murmured. The words sent a chill through me, but I shook it off. Kids scratch themselves in their sleep all the time, right? But that night, it happened again. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to a soft noise, something scraping against the walls. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Emily, whispering. "Emily?" I called softly, walking down the hall to her room. The whispering stopped as I opened the door. She was standing in front of her closet again, her back to me, her hand outstretched toward the door. "Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling now. She didn't respond. She was completely still. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" I moved toward her, and as I touched her shoulder, she snapped her head around. Her eyes, those eyes, were wide, unblinking. "Mr. Long says you need to stop asking questions," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. My blood froze in my veins. She smiled, the expression far too wide for her small face. "He's here. He's always been here." I grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her. "Emily, snap out of it." "What are you talking about?" Her face relaxed and she blinked. For a moment, it was like nothing had happened. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft and innocent again. I didn't know what to say. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "You were just talking to someone," I managed to say. She shrugged, looking confused. "I don't know, Daddy. I was just standing here. I don't remember talking." I didn't know what to think. It didn't make sense. The way her voice had changed, it felt wrong. Too deep, too cold. But I couldn't let myself think about it. I just pulled her into bed with me, hoping the nightmare would fade. The next morning, I found the drawings. I was cleaning up after breakfast when I spotted them scattered on the floor. Dozens of them, the paper crinkled and torn, as if they had been scribbled in a hurry. I bent down to pick one up. The first was a picture of a woman. No, not a woman. It was something wrong. He was impossibly thin, stretching out of proportion, his arms too long, his fingers like jagged claws. His face was a grin, but not a human one. The teeth were sharp, uneven. His eyes were hollow, black, as if there was nothing behind them. At the bottom of the drawing, Emily had written, "Mr. Long likes to watch." I dropped the picture, a chill running down my spine. I turned to find more, each one worse than the last. In the next drawing, Emily was holding his hand, standing beside him. Her face was blank, her smile just as wide and disturbing as his. The two of them were surrounded by shadows, the room dark and empty except for them. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I shuffled through the pile. The last one made my blood run cold. It was of our house. But the windows were all black except for one, the window in Emily's room. And in that window, Mr. Long's face was staring out at me. I ran to her room, nearly tripping over my own feet. She was sitting on the floor, her back to me. "Emily," I said, my voice sharp with fear. "Who is Mr. Long?" She didn't turn around. She just sat there, staring ahead, her voice quiet and distant. "He's my friend," she said. "He says I'm his favorite." I stepped forward, kneeling in front of her. "Emily, what do you mean? Where did you meet him? Tell me everything." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head slowly, her eyes locked onto mine. "Mr. Long says you shouldn't ask so many questions," she said, her voice cold and low. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. "What is he, Emily? Where did he come from?" She blinked, looking confused. "He was always here." I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet my eyes. "What do you mean? Where did he come from?" She smiled too wide and said, "Before you, before all of us." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with something I couldn't understand. The possession didn't happen all at once. It was slow, creeping into her like something that had always been there, waiting. One night, I woke up to the sound of soft laughter. It wasn't Emily's normal laugh. It was cold, hollow, like something was imitating her. I rushed down the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and there she was, standing in front of the closet again. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, her body stiff and rigid. "Emily?" I whispered, stepping inside. She didn't respond. She didn't even blink. She was just staring at the closet, her hand outstretched as if waiting for something to happen. "Emily!" I shouted. "What are you doing?" Her head snapped around with terrifying speed. Her eyes, those eyes, were dark, empty. She didn't speak, just smiled. Then, in a voice that wasn't hers, she said, "He's here, and he says you don't belong here anymore." My blood froze. I backed away, but she followed, her movements jerky, unnatural. The air in the room felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I turned to run, but before I could, the closet door creaked open. I could hear breathing, heavy breathing, slow, ragged. And then a shadow, the shadow of something tall, impossibly thin, stepped out of the closet, its limbs stretching too far, its head tilting in an unnatural angle. "Daddy, come meet Mr. Long," Emily whispered, her voice cold and distorted. I screamed. I grabbed her, pulling her out of the room, out of the house, as the thing behind us followed. I could hear it in the shadows, just behind us, closer than it had ever been before. That night, Emily fell asleep in my arms, her breathing shallow and even. For the first time in days, she seemed normal, but I knew, I could feel it. Mr. Long was still there, waiting. Every night, the closet door is slightly ajar, and when I turn off the lights, I swear I can hear something moving inside. Something waiting for me. And sometimes when Emily isn't looking, I swear I hear her whispering to him. The whispers are getting louder, and one day, I know he's coming for me.